money, power, and a wedding ring usually guarantee a woman untouchable status in the underworld. But when a billionaire mob boss's spoiled fiancée crosses the line by humiliating the estate's heavily overweight maid with a bucket of industrial paint, she unleashes a storm she never saw coming. What happens when the city's most ruthless man decides a fat, unseen housekeeper is worth more than a high society alliance? Stick around, because this true crime romance is about to turn brutally satisfying. Penelope Davies knew her place in the sprawling, terrifying ecosystem of the Costello estate. She was the heavy, invisible ghost who scrubbed the imported Italian marble floors before the sun rose and polished the mahogany banisters until her thick fingers ached. At 300 pounds, Penelope was a fat, soft woman trapped in a world made of sharp edges and lethal consequences. The Costello family did not forgive mistakes, and their patriarch, Dominic Costello, was a man whose reputation for casual brutality kept the entire eastern seaboard in a state of nervous compliance. Penelope's primary survival strategy was simple: keep her head down, do her job, and never, ever draw the attention of the man who ran the city's endroit. For the most part, staying off Dominic's radar was easy. He was a phantom in his own home, a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes the color of shattered ice and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. He spent his days in the heavily guarded West Wing, orchestrating illicit shipping routes, silencing rivals, and expanding an empire built on blood and extortion. Penelope only ever saw him in passing, a dark silhouette stepping out of a bulletproof SUV, or a quiet menace sitting at the head of the colossal dining table. He never spoke to the staff. He merely existed as a terrifying force of nature. The real danger to Penelope's daily existence was not the Mafia boss, but the woman he was slated to marry. Chloe Harrington was a vision of high society perfection, a razor-thin blonde with cheekbones that could cut glass and a heart entirely devoid of empathy. As the daughter of Richard Harrington, a deeply corrupt state senator, Chloe was the linchpin in a strategic alliance meant to give Dominic Costello unprecedented political cover. She moved into the estate 3 months before the wedding, bringing with her a mountain of designer luggage and a vicious, petty cruelty that she unleashed on the domestic staff. Penelope, simply by existing in her large, cumbersome body, became Chloe's favorite target. On a damp Tuesday morning, Penelope was on her hands and knees in the grand foyer, wiping away the muddy footprints left by one of Dominic's enforcers. Her breath came in soft, heavy pants. The fabric of her grey uniform stretched tight across her broad back and thick thighs. She hated the uniform. It was designed for women half her size, and the constant chafing was a humiliating reminder of her physical reality. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of Christian Louboutin heels echoed down the grand staircase. Penelope froze, her heart sinking into her stomach. God, the smell in here. Chloe's nasal voice sliced through the quiet foyer. It smells like sweat and cheap detergent. Penelope kept her eyes glued to the marble, her wet rag pausing in its circular motion. She tried to make herself smaller, a nearly impossible task, hoping the heiress would just walk past her to the waiting town car outside. "You!" Chloe snapped. Penelope slowly pushed herself up, her knees protesting the movement. She stood, folding her damp, red hands in front of her stomach. "Yes, Miss Harrington?" Chloe stopped a few feet away, her lip curling in genuine disgust As she looked Penelope up and down, she was wearing a tailored white Chanel suit that probably cost more than Penelope's entire decade of wages. I don't understand why Arthur insists on keeping you on the payroll. Look at you. You're sweating just from standing up. It's disgusting. You take up half the hallway, Davies. It's like navigating around a beached whale. Penelope swallowed hard, the familiar sting of tears pricking the back of her eyes. She had heard it all before, the fat jokes, the cruel jabs about her diet. But it never stopped hurting. I'm sorry, Miss Harrington. I'll get out of your way. You shouldn't even be in the main house, Chloe sneered, stepping closer, emboldened by Penelope's subservience. You're an eyesore. I told Dominic last night that once we're married, the entire staff is getting an overhaul. I want attractive, capable people working for me. Not lazy fat slobs who look like they're going to have a heart attack just carrying a laundry basket. Is there a problem here, Chloe? The voice was low, devoid of any warmth, and it hit the room like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Both women turned to see Dominic Costello standing in the archway of the adjoining library. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. His expression was completely unreadable, his pale eyes locked onto his fiancée. Chloe's cruel sneer vanished instantly, replaced by a radiant, sickeningly sweet smile. Dominic, darling, no problem at all. I was just instructing the maid on proper hygiene. You know how particular I am about the house. Dominic's gaze shifted slowly from Chloe to Penelope. Penelope felt a cold sweat break out across her neck. She dropped her chin, terrified of meeting the mobster's eyes. He stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He took in her flushed, rounded cheeks, the way her uniform strained across her heavy chest, and the slight tremble in her thick fingers. Davies, Dominic said, his voice a quiet rumble. Yes, Mr. Costello, Penelope whispered. Go to the kitchen. Tell the cook to make you a cup of tea. Take 15 minutes. Chloe's jaw dropped slightly. Dominic, she hasn't finished the foyer. I didn't ask for your input, Chloe. Dominic cut her off, not raising his voice. Yet the absolute authority in his tone made the hair on Penelope's arms stand up. He looked back at his fiancée, his eyes narrowing imperceptibly. The foyer is fine. If you have places to be, I suggest you leave before traffic gets bad. Penelope didn't wait to see Chloe's reaction. She practically fled toward the servants' corridor, her heavy footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. She was shaking violently. Dominic Costello had never spoken to her directly in the 4 years she had worked at the estate. He had certainly never intervened on her behalf. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the sprawling kitchen, gasping for air, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tectonic plates of the Costello mansion had just shifted. She just didn't know yet that the real earthquake was still to come. The preparations for the engagement. Gala turned the Costello estate into a chaotic war zone of florists, caterers, and interior decorators. Chloe Harrington, desperate to prove her worth to New York's elite and the city's criminal underbelly alike, demanded absolute perfection. The east wing of the mansion was simultaneously undergoing a rapid renovation to convert an old parlor into a massive walk-in closet for the future bride. Plaster dust, drop cloths, and heavy buckets of industrial primer cluttered the back hallways. Penelope was exhausted. She had been working 14-hour shifts, hauling crates of champagne, polishing endless sets of silver, and dodging the frantic contractors. Her feet were swollen. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, constant ache, and her large body felt heavier than it ever had. It was Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the gala. Chloe was hosting a preliminary luncheon in the solarium for her closest friends, a vicious gaggle of socialites who viewed the estate staff as nothing more than interactive furniture. Penelope had been tasked with hauling away the heavy, discarded catering trays. As Penelope carried a towering stack of dirty porcelain plates down the rear hallway, she carefully navigated around the construction zone. The contractors had gone to lunch, leaving open cans of thick, stark white primer sitting on top of plastic drop cloths. Suddenly, the door to the solarium swung open. Chloe marched out, her face flushed with angry, blotchy red patches, followed closely by 2 of her friends, Jessica and Lauren. Chloe was furious. The floral arrangements she had ordered for the luncheon were slightly the wrong shade of pink, a minor detail that had sent her into a screaming fit. Penelope immediately pressed her large frame against the wall, trying to make room for the 3 women to pass, balancing the heavy tray of dishes on her hip. "It's completely unacceptable," Chloe was ranting, waving her manicured hands. "I explicitly said blush, not magenta. Do you know how much Dominic is paying them? And they treat me like some idiot housewife." "You have to fire them, Chloe," Jessica agreed soothingly. "You can't let the help walk all over you." Chloe's furious gaze darted down the hallway and locked on to Penelope. All the pent-up rage, the insecurity about her upcoming marriage to a terrifying man who barely touched her, and the petty frustration of the wrong flowers coalesced into a single point of malice. "Watch where you're standing, you fat cow," Chloe snapped, marching directly toward Penelope. "I'm sorry, miss," Penelope stammered, trying to press herself even flatter against the expensive wallpaper, but there was nowhere for her wide hips to go. Chloe stopped right in front of her. "Are you deaf? I said move. You're taking up the entire corridor." "I have the dishes, miss. I'm just trying to—" "I don't care what you're doing," Chloe shrieked. She reached out and aggressively shoved Penelope's shoulder. Because Penelope was holding the heavy tray, her center of gravity was already off. The sudden, violent push made her stumble backward. Her thick, rubber-soled shoe caught the edge of a heavy contractor's tarp. Penelope lost her balance. The tray tipped, and a dozen expensive porcelain plates shattered violently onto the hardwood floor, sending shards of ceramic flying in every direction. Penelope gasped, falling heavily onto her knees right in the middle of the broken china. The sharp pain lanced through her legs, but the humiliation was worse. Chloe burst into cruel, high-pitched laughter. "Look at her, like a giant, clumsy elephant. You can't even walk down a hallway without causing a disaster." Jessica and Lauren giggled from behind her, hiding their smiles behind their hands. "Clean it up, Davies," Chloe spat, "and then pack your bags. I'm firing you. I'm not having a disgusting, incompetent pig ruining my house." Penelope was trembling, tears spilling hot and fast down her full cheeks. "Please, Miss Harrington, I need this job. Please." Penelope's begging only fueled Chloe's twisted sense of power. The heiress looked around the hallway and noticed the open 5-gallon bucket of white primer sitting on a nearby scaffolding plank. A dark, vicious light sparked in Chloe's eyes. "You need a lesson on how to clean," Chloe said softly. Before Penelope could understand what was happening, Chloe grabbed the heavy bucket of paint by the metal handle. With a surprising burst of spiteful strength, Chloe hoisted it up and tipped it directly over Penelope's head. The heavy, suffocating white liquid crashed down on Penelope. It was freezing cold. The thick primer coated her hair, blinded her eyes, and poured down the front of her uniform, soaking into her heavy breasts and pooling in her lap. Penelope let out a muffled, choked cry, raising her thick, paint-covered hands to her face, trying to wipe the chemical sting from her eyes. "There," Chloe sneered, tossing the empty bucket onto the floor with a loud clatter. "Now you match the walls. Maybe you'll actually blend in for once." The socialites erupted into genuine laughter, pointing at the pathetic fat woman sobbing on her knees, covered head to toe in dripping white paint. Then the laughter stopped abruptly. The silence that fell over the hallway was not just quiet. It was the suffocating, terrifying vacuum that precedes a bomb detonation. Dominic Costello stood at the end of the corridor. He was flanked by two of his most lethal enforcers, but they were entirely unnecessary. The sheer, radiating menace rolling off Dominic was enough to freeze the blood in Chloe's veins. I was staring at Penelope. He saw the broken plates, the spilled paint, and the large, sobbing woman shivering on the floor, humiliated beyond measure. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't rush forward. He walked down the hallway with slow, deliberate steps that sounded like gunshots in the dead quiet. Chloe's smug satisfaction evaporated into raw terror. "Dominic, darling, she tripped and made a mess. I was just—" Dominic didn't even look at her. He stopped right beside Chloe, but his icy blue eyes remained fixed on Penelope, who was violently trembling, too terrified and blinded by paint to even look up. "Get out," Dominic said. The words were softly spoken, but they carried the weight of an execution order. Chloe swallowed, her throat clicking audibly. "Dominic, she ruined the—" Dominic slowly turned his head to look at his fiancée. The emptiness in his eyes made Chloe stumble back a step. "I said, get out of my sight, before I have you thrown out a window." Chloe gasped, turning pale. Without another word, she grabbed her friends and practically ran down the hall, her heels clicking frantically in retreat. Dominic looked back down at the shivering, paint-covered Maid. The contrast was jarring. The most feared man in the state, standing over a ruined, overweight housekeeper. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a stark white, monogrammed silk handkerchief, and slowly knelt on the floor, completely disregarding the wet paint and broken glass threatening his tailored trousers. "Look at me," Dominic commanded softly. Penelope sniffled, slowly raising her face, wiping a glob of paint from her eyelid so she could see. When she met the mob boss's cold, intense gaze, her heart stopped. Dominic reached out with the silk cloth and began to gently, meticulously wipe the toxic white paint from Penelope's soft, round cheeks. "She's going to regret this," he murmured, his voice a dark, violent promise. "I am going to make sure she deeply regrets this." Dominic Costello did not care about ruined designer suits or shattered porcelain. As the freezing white primer soaked through his charcoal trousers, his complete attention remained anchored on the trembling, heavily sobbing woman kneeling before him. Penelope Davies squeezed her eyes shut, terrified that the mob boss would strike her for ruining his floor, for being a mess, for simply existing in a space where she was so clearly unwanted. Instead, she felt the surprisingly gentle friction of expensive silk against her cheek. "Breathe, Penelope," Dominic instructed, his voice entirely devoid of the lethal edge he used to command his criminal empire. He dragged the ruined handkerchief across her forehead, clearing the thick, chemical-smelling sludge from her brow. Penelope let out a shuddering, pathetic gasp, her large chest heaving against the tight, soaked fabric of her maid's uniform. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Costello. I didn't mean to." She pushed me. I lost my balance. "I'm too heavy. I couldn't stop myself." "Stop apologizing," Dominic commanded firmly, but without heat. He tossed the ruined silk square onto the floor and looked over his shoulder. His right-hand man, Vincent, stood at the end of the corridor, his face an impassive mask of professional violence. "Vincent, get Dr. Mitchell Grant here immediately. Tell him to bring a full ophthalmic kit. I want her eyes checked for chemical burns." "Right away, boss," Vincent replied, immediately turning on his heel and pulling a secure satellite phone from his jacket. Dominic returned his gaze to Penelope. "Can you stand?" Penelope nodded frantically, terrified of being a burden for even a second longer. She placed her wide, paint-slicked hands on the floor, trying to find leverage among the broken shards of plates. Her knees slipped, her thick thighs trembling from the exertion and the sheer adrenaline of the assault. Before she could crash back down into the mess, Dominic's large, calloused hands gripped her forearms. He didn't hesitate or struggle with her size. With a startling display of raw physical power, the billionaire hoisted the 300-pound woman to her feet. Penelope swayed heavily against him, leaving a massive smear of white paint across the lapel of his $3,000 suit. She gasped in horror, trying to pull her heavy body away. "Your suit, I ruined it. Please let me go." "I don't care about the damn suit," Dominic growled, wrapping a sturdy arm around her wide waist to keep her steady. He looked at her ruined uniform, the way the paint clung to her generous curves, and the humiliating way she tried to fold in on herself to appear smaller. A dark, terrifying fury ignited in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in decades. "You are going to the West Wing." Penelope's paint-covered eyes widened in sheer panic. The West Wing was Dominic's private sanctuary, though staff members were allowed there, except for his personal security detail. "Sir, no, I need to go to the laundry. I need to get my things. Miss Harrington fired me." "Chloe Harrington does not run my house," Dominic stated, his tone dropping an octave, vibrating with a suppressed, lethal rage. "And she certainly does not dictate who works for me. You are coming with me." Dominic did not give her a choice. He guided her large, trembling frame through the hidden security doors and into the sprawling, dimly lit sanctuary of the Master Wing. The air here was quiet, smelling of expensive cedar, leather, and fine Scotch. He led her into an enormous guest suite, guiding her into a lavish bathroom crafted entirely from black marble. "There is a shower," Dominic said, stepping back slightly to give her space. "Use whatever you need. There are thick robes in the cabinet. Leave that ruined uniform in the tub. When you are clean, Dr. Grant will look at your eyes." Penelope stood in the center of the luxurious bathroom, dripping white primer onto the heated tiles, looking entirely out of place. Her broad shoulders shook as fresh tears carved clean paths through the paint on her face. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm just the fat maid. Everyone knows it." Dominic paused in the doorway. He looked at her. Really looked at her. Beneath the harsh cruelty of the world's judgment, he saw a woman of immense warmth, soft curves, and quiet resilience. He had spent his life surrounded by razor-thin, artificial women like Chloe, women constructed of sharp edges, greed, and ruthless ambition. Penelope was entirely real. "You are not just a maid to me, Penelope," Dominic said softly, the confession surprising even himself. "And you will never be treated like garbage in my home again." He closed the door, leaving Penelope alone in the luxurious silence. As he stepped out into his private study, the gentle, protective man vanished, replaced instantly by the ruthless apex predator of the eastern seaboard. Vincent was already waiting by the mahogany desk. "The doctor is 3 minutes away," Vincent reported. "What do we do about the Harrington woman?" Dominic poured himself a neat scotch, his knuckles white around the crystal tumbler. "Chloe is a rabid dog, and she just proved she cannot be trained. But simply shooting her would cause a political headache." He took a slow sip, his blue eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying calculation. "Call Arthur at Bancroft Harding Investments. I want a complete audit of Senator Harrington's offshore accounts. Look into the shell companies they use in the Caymans. I know the senator has been embezzling union pension funds to fuel his daughter's lifestyle. Find the paper trail." Vincent nodded slowly, a predatory smirk touching his lips. "You want to ruin them financially before you break the engagement?" "No," Dominic said softly, placing the glass down. "I want to ruin them publicly. Let Chloe have her little engagement gala on Saturday. Let her dress up, parade around her society friends, and pretend she's the queen of the city. Let her feel invincible." Dominic turned to look out the window at the sprawling grounds. "Because when I rip the crown off her head, I want the entire city watching her bleed." Saturday evening descended upon the Costello estate with a suffocating, extravagant opulence. Their engagement gala was heavily orchestrated to be the social event of the decade. Dozens of luxury cars lined the sweeping driveway, depositing the wealthiest and most corrupt figures of New York high society into the grand foyer. Crystal chandeliers blazed, a string quartet played softly in the background, and champagne flowed like water. In the center of the massive ballroom, Chloe Harrington was in her element. She wore a suffocatingly tight Vera Wang gown that clung to her emaciated frame, practically glittering with diamonds, purchased by her corrupt father. She laughed shrilly, sipping a martini and accepting the fawning compliments of her socialite friends, Jessica and Lauren. She had completely forgotten about the overweight maid she had assaulted 2 days prior. To Chloe, the incident had merely been a moment of necessary discipline. Dominic hadn't mentioned it again, and she arrogantly assumed the mob boss had simply recognized she was right to assert her dominance. She could not have been more spectacularly wrong. Upstairs, far removed from the thumping bass and the clinking of crystal glasses, Penelope sat on the edge of a plush, king-sized bed. She was dressed in a soft, incredibly expensive dark emerald wrap dress that Dominic had explicitly ordered delivered to her room. It hugged her heavy curves perfectly, emphasizing her large breasts and the soft slope of her wide hips without making her feel trapped. Her hair was clean, falling in thick, dark waves around her shoulders. Dr. Grant had given her a clean bill of health, though the emotional bruising was still raw. The heavy oak door clicked open, and Dominic stepped into the room. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, looking like a terrifying fallen angel. When his eyes locked onto Penelope, his breath hitched. He walked toward her, completely ignoring the lavish gala waiting for him downstairs. "You look beautiful," Dominic murmured, stopping just inches from her knees. Penelope blushed violently, looking down at her thick thighs. "You don't have to say that, Mr. Costello. I know what I look like." Dominic reached out, his warm fingers gently gripping her chin and tilting her face up to meet his icy gaze. "I am a man who deals exclusively in facts, Penelope. You are breathtaking. Your body is a masterpiece, and I am tired of you believing the lies spoken by a bitter, hollow woman. His thumb stroked her soft cheek. Stay here. Watch the ballroom feeds on the security monitor. I have some garbage to take out. Downstairs, the clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal microphone brought the sprawling ballroom to a hushed silence. Dominic stood on the raised dais at the front of the room. Chloe immediately glided up the stairs, beaming a picture-perfect, camera-ready smile as she linked her bony arm through his. Senator Richard Harrington stood in the front row, puffing his chest out with arrogant pride, completely unaware of the sniper laser trained invisibly on his chest from the balcony shadows. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic began, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the massive space, "we are gathered here tonight to celebrate a union, a merging of two very prominent families." Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder, posing for the flashes of the exclusive press photographers allowed in the room. "However," Dominic continued, his tone dropping into a terrifying clinical deadpan, "I am a businessman, and a successful businessman knows when to cut a bad investment." The silence in the room suddenly grew heavy, oppressive. Chloe's smile froze, her perfectly contoured face twitching in confusion. "Dominic! Darling, what are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. Dominic gently but firmly detached her hands from his arm, stepping away from her as if she were diseased. He looked out at the crowd, pulling a thick stack of folded documents from his tuxedo jacket. "Senator Harrington," Dominic said loudly, locking eyes with the older man whose face was rapidly draining of color. "I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing the financial transfers from the Oakhaven Trust, specifically the accounts tied to the municipal union pensions. It seems that over the last 5 years, nearly $12 million of working-class retirement funds have magically migrated into offshore shell accounts in the Caymans." A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Journalists in the back immediately raised their cameras, furiously snapping photos. "That's a lie!" Senator Harrington shouted, his face turning a blotchy, furious red, though the visible shaking of his hands betrayed his guilt. "This is an outrage! Costello, you can't—" "I have already forwarded the unredacted ledgers to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the local press," Dominic interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through the rising panic like a machete. "I protect my city. I do not ally myself with parasites who steal from the elderly to fund their daughters' shopping sprees." Chloe was hyperventilating, her hands flying to her face. "Dominic, stop it! What is wrong with you?" Dominic finally turned to look at the woman he was supposed to marry. His eyes held absolutely no warmth, only a chilling, absolute disgust. "2 days ago, this woman assaulted an innocent member of my staff, a kind, beautiful woman who has 10 times the worth of anyone standing in this room." Chloe poured a bucket of industrial chemicals on her, simply because she didn't like the way she looked. Chloe stepped back, her heels wobbling, tears of sheer panic ruining her expensive makeup. The high society crowd, normally eager to excuse bad behavior, recoiled from her in the face of Dominic's lethal public condemnation. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship, especially one being sunk by the head of the Costello family. "The engagement is over," Dominic declared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "The Harrington family is no longer welcome in my home, my businesses, or my city. Vincent, escort this trash off my property. If they resist, break their legs." The ballroom erupted into sheer chaos. Senator Harrington was screaming for his lawyers, while two massive, heavily armed enforcers grabbed him by the arms, dragging him toward the exit. Chloe collapsed to her knees in her Vera Wang gown, sobbing hysterically as her so-called friends turned their backs, practically running for the valet to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. Upstairs in the quiet sanctuary of the master suite, Penelope watched the monitor with wide, tear-filled eyes. She pressed a soft, heavy hand to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dominic Costello, the most feared man on the eastern seaboard, had just burned his own lucrative political alliance to the ground and destroyed an empire, all to avenge the honor of a fat, invisible maid. And as she heard his heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching the bedroom door once again, she realized that in his eyes, she was finally seen. The heavy oak door of the master suite clicked shut, sealing out the faint, echoing chaos of the ruined gala downstairs. Dominic Costello leaned back against the thick wood, loosening the silk bow tie at his collar with a sharp, exhausted tug. Across the expansive room, Penelope Davies sat frozen on the edge of the velvet mattress, her hands gripping the lush emerald fabric of her dress. The security monitor on the wall still flashed with silent, chaotic footage of the New York Police Department and FBI agents flooding the grand foyer, placing Senator Richard Harrington in handcuffs while his daughter screamed in the background. Dominic stepped fully into the room, his icy blue eyes entirely focused on Penelope. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, closing the distance between them until he stood between her parted knees. "You ruined everything," Penelope whispered, her voice trembling, her wide, tear-filled eyes looking up into his face. "Your alliance, the political protection. You burned it to the ground for me." "Why?" Dominic reached down, his large, calloused hands gently resting on the soft, wide curve of her hips. "Because you are the only real thing in this entire city, Penelope," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by hollow people. Parasites in designer clothes who would sell their own blood for a percentage point on a stock portfolio. I watched Chloe Harrington abuse you, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt something other than cold apathy. I felt rage." Penelope swallowed hard, a fresh tear slipping down her round cheek. "But I'm fat. I'm a maid. People like you don't look at women like me. You could have anyone." "I don't want anyone," Dominic countered fiercely, stepping closer so her heavy breasts brushed against his tuxedo jacket. He slid his hands up her thick waist, his fingers tracing the soft indentations of her body through the silk dress. "I have watched you for 3 years, Penelope. I watched you work yourself to the bone. I watched you endure humiliation with a quiet strength that terrified me. And I watched the way your body moved, the softness of it, the weight of it." He leaned down, pressing his lips to the pulse, fluttering wildly at the base of her thick throat. Penelope gasped, her eyes fluttering shut as a jolt of pure electricity shot down her spine. No man had ever touched her with such profound, deliberate worship. "Do not ever apologize for your size again," Dominic murmured against her warm skin, his hands moving to cup her large, heavy breasts, his thumbs brushing over the tightening peaks through the fabric. "Chloe Harrington is a stick figure composed of Botox and Daddy's stolen money. You are a goddess. You are soft. You are warm. And you belong to me now." Penelope let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in the crook of his neck. the years of emotional abuse, the cruel taunts about her weight, and the exhausting reality of being invisible, all shattered under the crushing weight of Dominic's devotion. He lifted her easily, laying her back against the expensive pillows, and for the rest of the night, the brutal Mafia boss worshipped every single curve, stretch mark, and soft roll on her body, proving with every touch that she was the most valuable thing he possessed. Meanwhile, across the city, the Harrington legacy was disintegrating in real time. Inside a sprawling, heavily mortgaged penthouse on the Upper East Side, Chloe Harrington hurled a crystal vase against the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. Her Vera Wang gown was ruined, stained with mascara and spilled wine. The Southern District of New York had frozen every single one of their bank accounts by midnight. The Oakhaven Trust was under federal investigation, and her father was sitting in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, awaiting arraignment for embezzlement and wire fraud. "We are ruined!" Chloe shrieked, pacing frantically across the Persian rug. "My friends won't even answer my calls. Jessica blocked my number." Sitting in the shadowed corner of the penthouse, dragging slowly on a thick cigar, was Liam Fitzpatrick. As the head of the Westies, an incredibly violent Irish syndicate operating out of Hell's Kitchen, Fitzpatrick was not a man invited to high society galas. But Senator Harrington owed him $5 million in laundered casino money, and with Dominic Costello pulling his protection, Fitzpatrick had come to collect. "Your social life is the least of your concerns, little girl," Fitzpatrick growled, blowing a thick cloud of acrid smoke into the room. "Your father's assets are seized. He owes me $5 million. Since he can't pay, I'm taking this penthouse, the cars, and anything else that isn't nailed down. And if it doesn't cover the debt, I'll have my boys take it out of your pretty face." Chloe froze, genuine terror icing her veins. She looked at the brutal Irish mobster, her desperate, narcissistic mind spinning for a lifeline. She had lost her billionaire fiancé, her status, and her wealth, all because of that fat, disgusting Maid. A venomous hatred eclipsed her fear. "Costello," Chloe breathed out, her eyes widening with a psychotic realization. "Dominic has the money, and I know exactly how to make him pay you." Fitzpatrick raised a thick, scarred eyebrow. "Costello doesn't owe me a dime, and I don't poke the bear without a reason." "He threw away his entire empire for a maid," Chloe sneered, her voice dropping into a desperate hiss. "A fat, useless pig named Penelope. He's obsessed with her. He kept her in his private suite. If you take her, Dominic will give you anything you want. You get your $5 million, and you get to humiliate the most powerful man in New York." Fitzpatrick slowly lowered his cigar, a cruel, calculating smile spreading across his heavily scarred face. "A maid, you say? I can get you the security codes for the estate's service entrances," Chloe promised, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "I still have my Access app on my phone. Just make sure you make the fat bitch suffer." 3 weeks passed in a blur of surreal, breathtaking luxury for Penelope Davies. The sprawling Costello estate had transformed from a terrifying workplace into a heavily guarded sanctuary. Dominic systematically eradicated every trace of Chloe Harrington from the property. He fired the snobby catering staff, brought in private chefs, and replaced Penelope's grey, chafing uniforms with a wardrobe that would make a queen weep. Dominic had personally escorted her to Bergdorf Goodman on 5th Avenue, clearing out the entire 3rd floor. For the first time in her life, Penelope was not shoved into the back corner of a plus-size department or handed tent-like garments. High-end tailors measured her thick thighs, her wide hips, and her heavy breasts, crafting custom silk dresses, cashmere coats, and lingerie that made her feel devastatingly beautiful. The staff addressed her as "Ma'am," bowing their heads in deep respect, fully aware of the lethal, dark-suited man standing behind her with a black titanium Amex card. Penelope was finally beginning to believe she was safe. But in the underworld, safety is always an illusion. It was a rainy Tuesday night. Dominic had taken Penelope to a private, extremely exclusive dinner at Le Bernardin, buying out the entire back dining room so she could enjoy the world-class seafood without the anxiety of public stares. Penelope wore a stunning, deep crimson velvet dress that hugged her generous curves, a diamond pendant resting heavily against her deep cleavage. She was laughing softly at something Dominic had said, her heart completely full, when the heavy oak doors of the private dining room suddenly violently splintered inward. The chaotic roar of suppressed submachine gun fire shattered the romantic quiet. Dominic reacted with the terrifying speed of a seasoned apex predator. Before Penelope could even register the masked gunman flooding into the room, Dominic violently shoved her massive mahogany chair backward, sending her crashing to the floor behind the thick, bulletproof wood of the dining table. "Stay down!" Dominic roared, pulling a sleek, customized Glock 19 from his shoulder holster in a singular fluid motion. The air filled with the deafening sound of shattering crystal, tearing drywall, and the sharp, metallic ping of bullets striking the table above Penelope's head. She pressed her heavy body into the plush carpet, covering her ears, her chest heaving with sheer panic. Dominic returned fire with lethal precision. 2 of Fitzpatrick's hitmen dropped immediately, their masks blown open by hollow point rounds. But there were too many. 6 heavily armed men poured into the room, their weapons trained entirely on the table where Penelope was hiding. "Grab the fat bitch," one of the men shouted in a thick Irish brogue. "Fitzpatrick wants her alive." Dominic shot the man in the throat, but as he pivoted to take out the 4th attacker, the slide of his Glock locked back. Empty magazine. A massive, hulking hitman in a leather jacket lunged forward, tackling Dominic over the ruined table. The 2 men crashed onto the floor in a brutal tangle of limbs. The hitman was massive, easily 250 pounds of pure muscle, and he quickly gained the upper hand, pinning Dominic's gun arm down and drawing a serrated hunting knife from his belt. Penelope watched in sheer horror from the floor. Dominic was struggling, his face turning red as the hitman pressed his forearm against the mob boss's throat, raising the knife to end his life. Penelope didn't think. The paralyzing fear that had governed her entire life instantly evaporated, replaced by a blinding, maternal rage. She refused to lose the only man who had ever truly loved her. She pushed herself up from the floor. Her eyes darted around the ruined room and locked onto a massive, solid marble wine chiller sitting on a fallen serving cart. It weighed at least 40 pounds. With a roar of pure adrenaline, Penelope grabbed the heavy marble chiller with both hands. She didn't hesitate. She threw her entire 300-pound body weight forward, lunging across the room. The hitman didn't even see her coming. Penelope swung the marble chiller down with devastating force, connecting directly with the side of the hitman's skull. The sickening crack of bone echoed over the ringing in their ears. But Penelope didn't stop there. Using her massive momentum and heavy size, she tackled the stunned hitman off Dominic, crashing her full weight onto his chest and pinning him to the floor. The wind was violently knocked out of the attacker's lungs, her heavy, solid hips trapping his arms completely. Dominic gasped for air, rolling over and instantly retrieving a spare magazine from his ankle holster. He chambered around and fired twice into the remaining 2 gunmen at the door, dropping them instantly. The room fell into a terrifying, ringing silence, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the shattered windows and Penelope's heavy, frantic panting. She was still sitting on top of the unconscious hitman, the ruined marble wine chiller gripped tightly in her shaking, blood-spattered hands. Dominic slowly pushed himself up. He looked at the carnage, the dead men, and then his eyes locked onto Penelope. She was trembling, her crimson dress torn, her hair wild, but she had never looked more magnificent. She wasn't a fragile society girl who would faint at the sight of blood. She was a survivor. Dominic dropped to his knees beside her, gently prying the marble block from her hands. He pulled her heavy, shaking body tightly against his chest, burying his face in her dark hair. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands frantically checking her thick arms and broad back for bullet wounds. "Penelope, look at me. Are you hit?" "No," she sobbed, burying her face against his ruined suit. "I'm okay. I'm okay. But they said they wanted me. Why?" Dominic looked down at the unconscious hitman beneath her. He recognized the Celtic tattoos on the man's neck. The Westies. Liam Fitzpatrick. And he knew exactly how Fitzpatrick had known where they were. "Chloe," Dominic whispered, his voice transforming from panicked lover to the devil himself. The realization crystallized in his mind. Chloe Harrington had sold them out. She had tried to have Penelope taken. Dominic stood up, pulling Penelope gently to her feet and shielding her body with his own, as his private security finally burst through the doors, weapons raised. "Get her to the armored SUV," Dominic commanded Vincent, his eyes burning with an unholy, terrifying fire. "Lock down the estate." "What about Fitzpatrick and the Harrington girl?" Vincent asked, eyeing the carnage. Dominic reloaded his weapon, the metallic click sounding like a death knell. "Cancel all my meetings. I'm going to personally skin them alive." Liam Fitzpatrick's base of operations was a decaying meat-packing plant on the western edge of Hell's Kitchen. The air inside the cavernous structure was thick with the metallic stench of rust, old blood, and damp concrete. In a makeshift office suspended above the killing floor, Chloe Harrington sat shivering on a cracked leather sofa. Her ruined Vera Wang gown was stained with mud and cheap wine. She anxiously gnawed on her thumbnail, waiting for the heavy steel doors below to open and reveal her vengeance. She pictured Penelope Davies, that massive, disgusting maid, being dragged in, kicking and screaming. The thought brought a twisted, desperate smile to her face. Liam Fitzpatrick stood by the frosted glass window, pouring a glass of cheap whiskey. "My boys should have been back 20 minutes ago," the Irish mobster muttered, his heavy brow furrowing in irritation. "They probably hadn't a forklift to carry her," Chloe sneered bitterly, wrapping her thin arms around her bony chest to ward off the chill. "Just make sure Costello knows I was the one who took her from him. I want him to know I ruined his little obsession." Before Fitzpatrick could reply, the harsh overhead fluorescent lights violently popped, showering the office in a brief cascade of sparks before plunging the entire meat-packing plant into pitch blackness. Chloe gasped, dropping her plastic cup. "What happened?" Down on the main floor, The heavy steel reinforced doors did not open. They blew completely off their hinges in a deafening, concussive explosion that rattled the concrete foundation. Through the thick, swirling smoke and the pouring rain, tactical laser sights cut through the darkness like ruby razors. Dominic Costello did not send a message. He brought an army. The slaughter was systematic, silent, and absolute. Suppressed gunfire echoed rapidly through the massive warehouse as Dominic's elite enforcers moved with terrifying military precision. Fitzpatrick's men, hardened thugs of the Irish syndicate, were dropped before they could even unholster their weapons. Up in the office, Fitzpatrick frantically drew his heavy revolver, backing away from the window. "Costello," he breathed out in sheer panic. The door to the office didn't open. It was kicked off its frame with enough force to shatter the surrounding drywall. Dominic stepped into the room. He was no longer the polished billionaire in a tailored tuxedo. He was the apex predator of the underworld, his white shirt stained with the blood of the men he had just slaughtered, his icy blue eyes completely devoid of human mercy. Fitzpatrick raised his revolver, but Dominic was faster. He fired twice. The first hollow point round shattered Fitzpatrick's right kneecap. The second obliterated his left. The massive Irish mobster roared in agony, collapsing violently to the filthy floor, his gun skittering away into the dark. Chloe screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled backward on the leather sofa, pressing her frail, trembling back into the corner as if she could merge with the wall. Dominic walked slowly across the room, his heavy boots crunching over the broken glass. He stood over Fitzpatrick, looking down at the writhing, screaming man. "You sent men into my home," Dominic stated, his voice a low, vibrating hum of pure violence. "You targeted what is mine." "She made me do it," Fitzpatrick sobbed, pointing a shaking, blood-covered finger at Chloe. "The Harrington bitch! She gave us the codes. She told me about the fat maid." Dominic didn't blink. He simply leveled his Glock at Fitzpatrick's head and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the small office. Fitzpatrick's body went limp. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating, broken only by Chloe's hysterical, hyperventilating sobs. She was trapped. She looked at the blood pooling across the floor, at the dead mobster, and finally up at the terrifying man she had once intended to marry. "Dominic, please," Chloe begged, dropping to her knees on the blood-soaked floor, no longer caring about her ruined designer dress. She pressed her thin, shaking hands together. "Please, I was angry. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I just wanted to scare her, I swear. I'm a Harrington. You can't just kill me." Dominic stared down at her frail, pathetic form. "Killing you would be a mercy, Chloe, and you do not deserve mercy." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, tossing it onto the floor beside her shaking knees. "Agent Miller of the FBI is waiting outside with a tactical unit. That folder contains the forged ledgers connecting you, personally, to Liam Fitzpatrick's heroin smuggling ring. My men have already planted 20 kilos of narcotics in the trunk of your Mercedes." Chloe's eyes widened in sheer, mind-breaking horror. "No. No, you can't. You are going to a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life," Dominic promised coldly. "You will have no money, no father, and no protection. You will rot in a cage, surrounded by women who will tear you apart the moment they find out who you are. And every single day you spend in that hell, I want you to remember the woman you tried to destroy." Dominic turned his back on her, walking out of the office as the red and blue flashing lights of the FBI raid began to illuminate the broken windows of the warehouse. An hour later, the heavy doors of the master suite at the Costello estate clicked open. Dominic stepped inside, thoroughly exhausted, his knuckles bruised and his clothes smelling of rain and gunpowder. Penelope was sitting by the roaring fireplace, wrapped in a thick, luxurious silk robe. The moment she saw him, she stood up. She didn't ask questions. She didn't shrink away from the violence clinging to his aura. Her large, soft body moved across the room, and she wrapped her thick arms tightly around his broad chest, pulling him into the immense, comforting warmth of her embrace. Dominic let out a long, ragged breath, dropping his chin onto the top of her dark hair. He closed his eyes, inhaling the sweet scent of vanilla and expensive soap that clung to her skin. The monster in his chest finally went quiet. "It's over," he murmured, his hands tracing the wide, beautiful curve of her back. "They will never touch you again." Penelope pulled back slightly, her round, gorgeous face looking up at him with absolute, unwavering trust. "I know." Dominic took a step back. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small black velvet box. He didn't hesitate. The most ruthless man in New York slowly dropped to one knee, looking up at the curvy 300-pound woman who had completely conquered his cold heart. He opened the box, revealing a massive, flawless 10-carat emerald-cut diamond ring that caught the firelight in a blinding flash. "You are my sanity, Penelope," Dominic said softly, his voice carrying the absolute weight of a vow. "You are my queen. I want you to wear my name. Run my home and stand by my side for the rest of our lives. Marry me." Tears of pure, overwhelming joy spilled down Penelope's full cheeks. She didn't care about the dark world he ruled, because she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was the absolute center of his universe. She nodded, offering her thick, soft hand. "Yes," she whispered. Dominic slipped the massive diamond onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. What an explosive ending to a truly wild Mafia romance. Dominic Costello proved that true love is about protecting the woman who holds your heart, no matter her size or what the elite society thinks. If you loved seeing the Curvy Maid become the untouchable queen of the underworld, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, true crime romance sagas. Drop a comment below. Did Chloe get what she deserved, or should Dominic have handled her himself? See you in the next video.